think we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks to those of you who have shared a little bit in the chat. Please feel free to keep sort of sharing your ideas and your questions. We look forward to being able to answer them a little bit later. We're going to jump right in with just a few guidelines for engaging this evening. So one, please feel free to use the chat feature throughout this conversation. We absolutely value your voices. We look forward to hearing constructive ideas, sort of sharing resources and hearing your comments or reading your comments. As noted on the event page, we will be recording this portion of the session. At the end of the session, you will have the opportunity to join a breakout conversation group, and that portion will not be recorded. After Amy and I have our conversation to start this evening, we will have a Q&A, so please keep track of your questions. Unfortunately, in this just Zoom world we live in, we do have to address the concern of sort of cyberbullying or inappropriate comments. Anyone who engages in those comments or tries to attempts to intimidate other commenters will be promptly removed this evening. Safe space for all of us. And lastly, feel free to discuss this conversation on social as we chat tonight. We are at Achieve the Core, and the hashtag is Core Advocates if you'd like to use it. So I am one of your co-hosts and guests this evening. My name is Joy Delizo-Osborne, and I'm a director here at SAP. And I also run this series, Coffees and Conversations, which happens once a month. Amy.
Hi, and I'm Amy Briggs, the president at SAP. I'm super honored to be a guest on Joy's series. Longtime fan, first time guest, and really excited to see some familiar names in the chat and some great questions. So really looking forward to this time with you tonight.
Awesome. Well, one other thing we really want to highlight tonight and throughout all of our coffee and conversations is that for those of you that have known SAP for a while, these topics probably seem outside of the norm. And that is 100% because we are in the midst of a transformation. Tonight, we are talking about that transformation, but it's not a new one. It's hard work, it's ongoing work, and we are trying to do the real work of acknowledging the pieces of the puzzle of education, of equity, of anti-racism that we have left out of the conversation we've been having over the last decade or so, and are really trying to live up to our commitment to supporting historically marginalized students in their lives in general and in their lives in schools. And we hope that this programming and the other things that we bring to the table do that alongside the focus we've had on content all along. So you can continue to expect all of that from us as well. But yeah, we're changing, we're growing, it's great. And that's exactly what we're talking about tonight. So we have a few topics on sort of tap for you. Amy and I are just gonna kind of be going back and forth and sharing some ideas. And then we'll open up for questions. And at the end, we'll invite you to have conversations of your own if you are so moved. So our four big buckets tonight are one, I'll start with telling a little bit of a story. Then we'll talk about June 2020, last year, where we had a bit of a sea change here at SAP. We're gonna talk a little bit about white supremacy culture, how we've learned to see it and name it and are beginning to change it. Long journey on that one, and how we assess our progress along the way. So that is where we are headed this evening, and we look forward to inviting you along on our little journey. So the story I want to tell this evening is actually the story of my time at SAP. I joined SAP in August of 2019, and so June 2020 was just about a year. Almost a year of my time here. And the way I was brought into SAP is not wholly unusual, I don't think. As a woman of color, kind of got recruited And one of the major tasks I was given was to help us think about diversifying our network, so the Core Advocates Network. And that was really hard. I couldn't figure out how to do it. I kept asking questions, learning more about the challenge. But also when I started to ask questions like, why are we diversifying? To what end? How would diversifying our network change outcomes for students of color in our schools? There weren't really many answers, you know, and the biggest question that we lacked an answer to is like, what are we willing to change about what we do and how we do it to make this outcome happen? And that was the hardest question of all to answer. How are we changing if we want the people we're working with and reaching to change? So yeah, that was very frustrating. I was frustrated, and not because I didn't like the folks that I worked with. I love Amy. I think you're great as an individual. And our sort of institutional setup was one in which it was very easy for folks to say, well, we just don't have expertise in that. Well, that's just never how we've done it. I don't know how to do that. We aren't sure what you're talking about. I mean, the way we've always talked about it is this, and it's been fine, right? These very easy answers for not actually having to make a change. And they were everywhere, you know, left and right. Eventually, there was a small group of us, I think 4 or 5 of us, folks that had been at SAP for a while, folks that were newer, who came together on the side and created a working group trying to define instructional equity. We spent 5 months reading literature, writing definitions, thinking about what we could do to influence change in the organization. And when the time came to start to shop it around and present, we were kind of like dismissed, and not dismissed in like a harsh, like get out of here sort of way, but dismissed in a like, that's interesting. Thank you. Not sure what we're going to do with that, but appreciate, you know, your efforts. And it was a feeling that, you know, I think many of us trying to work for change in organizations feel all the time, right? That you sort of make your point, you pull together all of the evidence you can find, and at the end of the day, the response is, I mean, I appreciate that, and things are the way that they are. At some point, I feel like folks were interested in like new slides for presentations that they could, you know, like sub into PDs, or very interested in giving us feedback on our wording, editing things in our documents. But in terms of like the background, right, the bigger sort of systemic way we were thinking about our work, there was really no movement. And then it was June 2020.
And so this is, you say, so, you know, what else was happening at this time? Amy, what were you doing? And this time as Joy, and it probably doesn't reflect well on me as a leader, but I didn't know. I was clueless, right, that these conversations were happening. Where I was, I had executive sponsored a fantastic external group to come work with us. We have been working and continue to partner with Dr. Christine Ortiz and her group Equity Meets Design. And we had been spending quite a bit of time since really the summer of 2018, building capacity in equity-focused design principles, tools, and resources. So, you know, I think like many white leaders, I was like, okay, we're doing the thing. Doing the thing. We are talking about equity issues. We are talking about diversity and inclusion. There's awareness. And what we really had, and this is where we get to June 2020, as one of my colleagues put it so beautifully, I have to repeat it, was a failure to launch. So we knew a lot. And I think I observe this in a lot of organizations who are trying to do this work. There's a lot of knowing, and there's a lot of learning, and there's not a lot of doing. And, you know, hearing Joy's story and reflecting on what was happening, there was doing happening, but it was getting shut down. So we can talk a bit more about all the reasons for that. But in our case, that was certainly what was happening. A lot of knowing and no doing. And so what had to happen? So June 2020 happened. George Floyd was murdered. And our organization hit like a sort of a screeching halt. I will describe it as we just had a moment where the wheels came off and we said, what are we doing? And staff in our organization said, are we serious? Are we serious about our mission? Are we serious about working on behalf of students who have been, as Joy said, been historically marginalized? Are we serious about working on behalf of Black students?
Yeah.
And if so, why don't we address the white supremacy culture that is happening in our organization? And so that moment, I think, of external events and an internal conversation. And now we were equipped with more language and more awareness, all came to a head. And there was really a very interesting moment where, and we will share our continuum with you that we've been so grateful to be working with a continuum thinking about how to become an anti-racist multicultural institution. But there's really a moment where we said, I could see on staff. Oh, great, Joy, awesome. Yes, we have it in a slide. We did a little self-assessment, and this was actually planned, but it happened to coincide in that moment of June 2020. And there was a gap between what white staff members thought was happening and what staff of color thought was happening, a real and evident and obvious gap. So we were not in a place where we could continue without really calling a timeout, which we did.
Yeah. Big old timeout.
Big old timeout. Equity pause is how we framed it as an organization. Joy and I and two of our other colleagues planned an organizational learning deep dive that happened over 2 weeks with individual learning and group work. And we put things on hold while we did it. Yeah. Joy, you want to talk more about?
Yeah, and then, we kind of blew everything up. I mean, I feel like that is, that's the hard part about this work. And I will say, I've said it a few times to different colleagues, like all throughout this process, even as I'm like making the equity pause materials and everything, like I didn't really believe anything was going to happen. We'll share the link and all of these materials. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, we can share the link very soon. I didn't believe anything was going to happen. I truly thought we're going to do this and then we're going to realize how hard it would be to really meet any of the expectations on this continuum. And things will go back to normal, right? Because that's typically what happens. You get sort of enraged or enlivened by something, you notice a moment in history and you want to respond. And then your energy to respond when you realize how hard and systemic the issues are sort of withers away. And to Amy's credit, in July, she was still pushing. And in August, she was pushing again. And I think one of the things that really got us was one, this continuum, but also two, really starting to understand and recognize these characteristics of white supremacy culture in the ways that we were dealing interpersonally with one another. So I would say this is like the interpersonal piece, and then the continuum was more of the systemic questions that we needed to start to ask ourselves and answer about how we wanted to be as an organization.
Yeah. And I'll add, I think and thank you, Rahel, for putting in the link. So the link's in there in the chat if folks were looking to read some of those elements of the continuum. I think we had been talking about some of these characteristics of white supremacy culture and the interpersonal work, and that is adaptive work and long work. And for me, I'll say the work of a lifetime to unlearn behaviors. I I think one thing that really was important, Joy said to me when we were getting ready for this, isn't it really all about just not being, or taking a look at the thing that feels the most risky to look at?
Yeah.
The most risky to look at. And yes. So my answer is yes. I don't think I answered when you asked me that when we were, but yes, it is about that. And for us, what that was about was power, a power structure. And we had to address that in order to do any of the rest of this work. So for us, we had I could speak just specifically to our experience, a leadership team of 8 people. 7 of those people were white. That is the place where decisions went. Very sort of standard hierarchical model. Decisions went to that leadership team. And when you have a leadership team that is mostly white people who are making the decisions, you have a white supremacy structure. That's where the power is. And you have to change that. And so I'll give real credit to my colleagues. We looked at that and we said, well, so we shouldn't have this leadership team anymore. And we stopped meeting after we had that. So we told the team that. I think everybody was a little bit like, whoa, wait, what?
Yeah, definitely. Like, where are we going? Who's driving the car? Like, whoa, what's happening? Yeah.
What is happening?
Yeah.
But we said, look, if this is where decisions are being made in these meetings, that was the first step to say, like, okay, we're going to stop doing that. What else could happen? But that means that people have to be willing to give up something, including me. So as a white leader, I had to be ready to give up power, decision-making authority, control over certain projects, involvement in certain projects, managerial responsibilities. This is a list of what the white leaders at our team have now over the course of 6 months in our restructuring, redesign process of our organization, given up. All of those things. And that's real. But it has to happen. So I'll second how critical it is to be thinking about white supremacy culture, but also say that I think structures really matter. And there's all kinds of power, and you have to talk about power and where it get made.
Yeah, no, it's so true. I mean, I keep saying to everyone I can talk to about this, that piece, the giving up of power, was the part in particular that felt, if not impossible, highly improbable, right? Like, as a person of color, I was like, you're saying the leadership team is going to voluntarily not be the leadership. Like, there's no way. And I don't know what kind of special sauce is in the folks that were on that team, but it did happen. It has happened. And I think one of the things that has been most interesting in looking at the information on the screen, so these are 2 of the stages on that continuum: symbolic change and identity change. Like, these things were felt like so viscerally, like when we filled these out in June, like there was no way around them. And now, not everything is fixed. There was no magic bullet, but like things are just very different, and it started with some of those really concrete changes that happened fairly quickly at the beginning. It wasn't like eventually we will, or over the next 2 years we have a goal to, right? It was in June, we're going to do it. By September, it was done. And I think that I was gobsmacked. I mean, that was like so surprising. And we have so much work to do. I mean, Bridget, your question in the chat, I think, is a valid one.
Yeah.
I know it's a valid one, absolutely valid. And I don't know that there's a good answer for it from anyone.
I ask it of myself.
Yeah.
Right? Why was that the moment? There's, and we saw it. But we've seen other murders. We've seen their horrors inflicted. This is nothing new. So for us, that was our moment. I think it was a function of, I think, also where we were as an organization. Someone I think earlier in the chat said there has to be awareness, there has to be a conversation. And I think there also has to be trust and care. Like, these are our colleagues. These are people we care about. We love them. We want them to succeed. Like there's a for me, there's a real personal element of this, which is like, wow, we are humans here trying to be bring ourselves to work that really matters on behalf of kids and teachers and their families. And so.
Yeah, I would also say, I think like one of the things I hope is true, or that my colleagues who are white would agree with, is that, you know, by unlocking some of these power structures, I mean, we unlock things for everyone, you know,
Yes.
And that, you know, are folks of color in this organization sort of being listened to and taken more seriously? Yes. Are folks in general maybe being listened to and taken more seriously as well? Yeah, you know, leadership in the way that we had it sort of working before really privileged those who had it, who were at the top. They were unlikely to be moving out of the top anytime soon. And you really had to work on this like influencer game, right? To get yourself sort of heard, recognized, understood. And I think there are these questions about our burgeoning structure are good ones. And I will say, you know, we don't have details on that in this slide deck, but we can talk a little bit about it and acknowledge that we don't have many models. So we are building this plane as we are flying it. And we have a lot of work left to do, is the other thing I want to be really clear about. We are not at level 6 of anything. You see, we're between 3 and 4. We're still between 3 and 4, even with all of the changes that have taken place here at SAP. And we just did like a self-assessment again last week.
Yeah. I think there was a question in the chat about power and like how power manifests itself now. I do think one element of, and the slide's perfect for that, is as much as possible entering into collaborative and co-design approaches with as many people as you can get involved. And that doesn't mean that everything is a democratic vote, right? Like that, but it does mean that you're very clear about where decisions are being made and who gets input and when. And let's get all of this, you know, system working with everybody's input. And I do think there's a real power to that as opposed to sort of traditional hierarchical structures. But Joy, it looked like you were going to say something and I jumped in. I was thinking about
No, that definitely works. I think that the other piece that has really been sort of important was just finding different ways for people to give input. I think, you know, at the very start, we were like, we're going to ask everybody. Oh, we asked everybody. We have everyone's input. And it's like, no, actually, you have to ask in lots of different ways. You have to ask over and over and over again. People are coming along in their own journeys, and you have to kind of unequivocally say, like, these are the things that are non-negotiable. And I think that was also huge in terms of moving folks who had been like receptive, but not really going anywhere for a long time to, oh, I do have to kind of catch up. And that, I mean, the catching up is a lifelong project, as you said, Amy, and I don't know where we're going or, you know, who we're catching up to. I have to catch up. We all are catching up, right? Always. But having that growth mindset around our own knowledge when we historically been the people that are the experts is a skill building need. You know, it's a need to build our knowledge about how to do that and do it gracefully and meaningfully, how to repair relationships with each other, how to engage, how to have conflict more openly, how to give feedback. I mean, there are all of these skills that are sort of built into the basic skill of trying to eradicate some of these sort of toxic culture pieces that were keeping us from doing our best work, quite honestly.
Yeah, they were. I think that the other thing that I wish I could, well, I say it now and hopefully people will see it, like that white leaders who are trepidatious about entering this process or about, I mean, sure, this is scary. It's nerve-wracking, and trust your people, trust yourself, trust the team. What you discover in this process, what I discovered, I'll say, is it is definitely the most sort of closest work I've done on myself as a leader and my strengths and weaknesses, which is incredibly valuable and important. And the work that we're doing as a collective is far more brilliant than anything one of us could have come up with individually.
Absolutely.
It just is, it's just better. So we've all been on those projects or on those teams where things are just, you're like really cooking and you're getting great ideas. And like when you take away these toxic behaviors, I love that you said that, Joy, toxic behaviors and toxic structures, you begin to be in a place where that is just the norm, as opposed to, just a team that clicked or something that worked. Because you have structures in which everyone is contributing. And this was really hard for me to learn. I'm a girl that loves a survey. Love a survey. And when Joy said, yeah, I think we're going to need some focus groups. I think we're going to need some different, as we were designing all this, it all, we started with, we kept adding boxes because there were new ways for people to contribute. So I would think about that in, I know a lot of folks entered the call telling where to start. I do think one thing to think about is thinking about the humans you're working with and how they interact, share feedback, have conversations, because adapting that to lots of different styles and comfort levels is a really important part of the process.
Yeah. And then identifying to whom you are accountable, I think is the other piece too. Are we accountable to folks we're afraid of losing, followers, funders, etc.? Yes, somewhat. And we're also very much accountable to the students we say our work serves. And if those two things are at odds, that's a tension you have to lean into, as opposed to leaning away from and leaning out of, which feels like the much easier way to go. But I think it wasn't until we asked those questions out loud, all those questions people were thinking sort of silently in their head, well, what will happen if we say this? What if we change that? What will happen? Will we still have jobs? Will we have money anymore? What will happen? We had to answer that question instead of just saying oh, that is a scary question. Well, can't change anything. Oh, well, and I don't know that means there are no challenges ahead in that arena, but it's a lot less scary, I think, than I expected it to be. Which is a tiny sliver of hope, a place to be hopeful a little bit.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. We'd actually, well, Amy, did you have any final comments before we open up for questions?
No, I mean, I think I just echo your comment on, measuring progress against this. It's a slow walk, and that's okay. I think as we looked at this and said, where are we now? I think the thing I was most excited about was to hear colleagues say, well, we've definitely gotten rid of those. Mm-hmm. One of my colleagues said the lingering twos, because it's that second column. Those are done. Those are behind us, which does feel like progress, right? That you're moving in that direction. So I do think taking progress, keeping yourself accountable is absolutely necessary. We're using this framework to sort of mark ourselves along the way, but you do need a shared common language and tool to see where you are and recognize that it's slow work and celebrate the successes. We asked a question of the team in this reflection, a recent reflection, about what they would celebrate about their work. And there were many answers, very different, and lots of joy in that. So celebrate those moments. They'll keep you going as you measure against what is a long journey.
Absolutely. Thanks for adding questions in the chat. Amy, maybe you can take a look there, and I'm going to get us set up to see the poll everywhere up on the screen.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I don't know if I'm going to get all of these questions. So there was one really easy question, which was, is there a replay or a recording? Yes, there is a recording. It will be posted on Achieve the Core after the discussion. Okay, going into content questions. There's a question here, Joy, which is, are we focusing our efforts to unpack white supremacy culture internally? Are we thinking about this from the standpoint of programming, or how it might be adjusted to support your partners? What are we thinking about right now?
I think it's both, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of it has been internal, right? Like, how could you even imagine supporting others, or, you know, trying to change materials before sort of doing some of your own work? I think was one of those tensions in last summer and fall, is like, we don't feel like we're doing enough, and yet there's so much to do. You know, for us to be in a place where when we're having these conversations, it's no longer the kind of conversation we used to have, right? The sort of like, I hear you, thanks, right? But like an actual, like, okay, what are we going to do about this? Or folks bringing their own critical lens and understanding of the systemic issues at play to the table. And so I think that work has been slow, steady, and important. And we are working on really shifting our work. And Amy, do you want to talk about the direction the work is taking?
Yes. Yeah, you may have seen it on that slide that, you know, we started this as a conversation about, you know, how we work as humans and who we are with each other, the organization. And that very quickly, so much that it's in that same graphic, it was started to be about the work. So what do we mean about the work? You know, our work has been for the past 10 years focused on standards aligned instructional materials, assessments, professional learning, high quality tools for teachers, practical resources that are rigorous and strong tools in math and literacy instruction. And we have talked about students on whose behalf we were working, but we were not specific. We were, you know, one of my colleagues called it sprinkling equity, right here and there. And that, I think, has really changed. We made a plan as we look ahead to the next 2 years to have a very sharpened focus, thinking about classrooms that support the academic success and thriving of Black students and students who are English learners specifically. So like thinking about groups that have been historically marginalized, that helps us think through questions of cultural relevance and responsiveness in pedagogy and materials, and it helps us think through linguistic supports for students who are coming in multilingual, learning, designated as English learners. Those are, when we started getting specific about who we were talking about, knowing that neither of those groups is a monolith and that there are many considerations to think of as you design with those outcomes in mind, we started getting somewhere, because we were talking about very specific outcomes we wanted to see. And so that's the sharpened focus is how we talk about our work. We have the same mission, which is to design actions based on evidence to improve student achievement, but we're really thinking very differently about how we put our resources and energy so that we think about those particular groups.
Yeah. So there are a bunch of questions in the poll everywhere.
There are.
I think one of the questions that follows this one, or what you were just sharing, Amy, really nicely, is around like our non-negotiables. So sort of as we work, where are the ways that we are, or what are the things we're holding really close as non-negotiable, and the ways that we work with each other, and the ways that we think about the work itself as we move forward.
I mean, I think, should I throw an answer out there?
Yeah, I think if you want to start.
Yeah. No, as I think, I mean, we think about non-negotiables, I think that, you know, it's essential, like we talked earlier about accountability, we have to be thinking always about who are we serving? Like what work are we doing? I think I myself can name that as a leader, I've thought of, you know, standards aligned instruction, materials, assessments, the work that we have done as technical challenges often, right? Like the technical changes of ensuring there are strong standards aligned textbooks and standards aligned assessments, et cetera. This is a problem, the work of humans. Standards are unfinished. Standards don't stay up late finishing their project for the next day of school during their homework. They don't stay up late planning the lesson for the next day or thinking about the scope and sequence for the next semester. That's humans. And so I think I would say the non-negotiable is to remain entirely human-centered as we think about the challenges. So that's my answer.
Yeah. I think we've also put in some guardrails. You know, I think, you know, we've named, like, we are a majority white organization, right? That is a reality. One, sort of moving the barriers that were in our structure that kept the folks of color that are on staff sort of not involved in the content of the work was one, I think, key change that we made structurally, right? So folks that were put in, I don't know, just positions that were not about the content, right? Because they didn't have the experience. We really tried to erase some of the barriers we had structurally around those folks engaging fully in conversations, right? This is like, when I say we have tried, it's not because we haven't, you know, said that, but that living what you say is difficult. And, you know, folks have deeply entrenched ways of working, myself included. And so I think that that is a work in progress, but it's something we check ourselves on now in a way that we didn't even look at before, right? Yes. So like incremental change in a case like this is change, and it's important and it's meaningful. I think in terms of, I see questions about, you know, did people have pushback? Was there reluctance? Did majority, you know, the white folks in the organization have concerns? I mean, I'm not a white person in the organization, so I don't know. And I know that we built in ways for folks to decide that this wasn't right for them anymore, if that were how they felt.
Yes, and so I, as a white person's organization, I'll speak to that one. Yes, sure. Like these are these are conversations. When having a conversation with another white colleague, particularly in a leadership role, and having that question be the center of it, what are you willing to give up for what we need to do? That is a hard conversation, right? It's hard for both parties. It's hard as a self-reflection. So I think, sure, there's reluctance to that. It's hard to look at. And so, and also, I think we, as a team, said we can see where we could get to, and need to do the work to get there, and name for each other when we're not leaning in enough. Feedback, that's the key. We're still working on that. Having a culture of really honest feedback where we can call each other out and keep each other true to the goals we've set. So that's real. But yeah, there is some reluctance. And I would say that in any situation like this, you do have you know, you have folks who lead into the change and you have folks who are reluctant, and you have folks who will exit.
Yeah.
Happen.
Yeah.
For any reason. And they might be white folks, they might be folks of color, like
Yes. Absolutely.
that happens, and it's real. So
yeah. I do want to say also, like, there's that fear that, I don't know, maybe all folks have, but I know for sure folks of color have, and some of us are not fearful, right? We feel like what happens, happens. For me, as a primary breadwinner in my household, you know, there's this fear, like if you speak up, if you actually say what you really think, well, aren't they going to find a way to get rid of me? You know, and I need this job, right? Like that was there for so long. And I think the only thing that got rid of that was Amy not getting rid of people because they disagreed. Literally the only thing, like over and over again, I'm like, I'm disagreeing. Uh-oh, like something's gonna happen. And that, you know, she's like, thank you for that. And then she actually tried to change. And I think that is, I mean, setting that example from the top is really important. And I think without that, and then other people, you know, following suit, it wasn't just Amy, it was people at different levels of the organization, like, okay, I was wrong, or I need to change what I'm doing, right? Like those kinds of like recognition statements are regular in our conversations now, as well as like the actual changing of behavior. And I think that without that, we wouldn't have gone anywhere, and we would have lost a lot more people like me. You know, like we wouldn't be here if not for this feeling that we were actually creating a space where people could fail, because this is hard and we're going to sometimes. And so I think that, I don't know, that has just felt so important to me, because the minute you get rid of some of that fear, right, then people are actually telling you the things you need to know to get better. As long as people are coddling your feelings, they're not telling you what you need to know. We know this in classrooms. Kids don't tell you what you need to know if they're afraid. And so I think that getting rid of that fear of retribution as a result of being honest about what's happening racially in an organization, or any other way. I mean, I'm queer too, right? Like, all of that is that's where it starts, I think. And I saw a question about that in terms of like fear getting in the way. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It stays in the way until you can kind of mitigate its impact. All right, there's like a million more questions. We are not going to be able to answer all of these questions.
We are not.
And
so many great questions and great.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can promise to find another way to continue this conversation and to provide more information as we move forward. The questions around like impacting our partners and the field, I mean, we're learning. I don't know. I think we want to be as open as we can about the process that we're in, but you know, these are really personal decisions people have made here at SAP, and the work, yes, absolutely. As we shift our work, you will see shifts in our work. You hopefully have already seen some shifts in our work, in our social media, and you know, all the different ways that we engage. Yes, that you can expect now and you know, moving forward. But the rest of it, I don't know. Amy, do you have thoughts? I don't want to.
No, it's, I mean, you said it to start, like you have to be in you have to put yourself in the seat of lead learner or learner or novice learner, wherever you are, but like taking that learning aspect and entering, that's from every interaction with partners, as we work with educators, as we think about our work ahead, the humility of being a learner opens up just tremendous opportunity because there is so much that we can all do if we try to learn together and we're honest about where we are, where our failures are, and where we see promise and opportunity. So I think I'll just double down on your your phrasing of learner, but we're also very as you said, guardrails, like knowing what we care about and knowing who we're accountable to. Like
Yes.
what we're out to do is change outcomes for kids, specifically kids who are Black and who are English learners. That's the mission. So if what we're doing is not in service of that, we'll take it off the table.
We'll change. Yeah.
We'll change.
We'll do something different.
We'll do something
Yeah.
more effective.
Yeah. I'm going to share my screen again. We are actually going to move into the conversations part of this evening. But hold on one second, sorry.
While you're saying, I will elevate, Shelby, you had a great comment about risk and whether in your circle is racist behavior or anti-racist behavior the bigger risk. That's a great reflection question in the chat, and I think that's one where you really have to acknowledge the damage of racist behavior and what it does, and that is not when you hold the anti-racist action up as a risk mechanism. There's a lot to unpack there. So thanks, Shelby, for making that comment.
Yeah. So when we move into conversations, we will not be coming back to this main room this evening, though we have all the questions in the poll everywhere. We have this chat, we'll save it, and we'll find ways to come back to this conversation in the future. Upcoming events for Coffee and Conversations. This is a monthly event. Our next one is on LGBTQ+ advocacy in K-5 classrooms. And then in March, April, and May, we will be tackling dismantling racism in mathematics. It'll be a series of sessions. Tonight, though, we would love to invite those of you that are still here and may be interested to join racial affinity groups. So we chose an affinity group structure this evening so that you can connect with folks that share some experience with you in trying to unpack some of what has, sort of come up in these conversations around whiteness, how it shows up, what the challenges are, how folks of color are responding. If you'd like one-on-one time with myself, Amy, other white folks from SAP, other folks of color from SAP, this is the place to get that sort of more personal interaction this evening. We'll have two groups, a white group and one for BIPOC folks, and we'll be able to break it down and make it a little smaller as needed if you decide to join. We'll share all of the resources from this evening. You'll have introductions and then a chance to just dig into some discussion. And SAP folks in the room will have the resources needed to support.